Today we need to talk about what the official inquiry is called the worst treatment disaster in the entire history of Britain's National Health Service. And look, this isn't just some story about a medical mistake. No, this is a story about a massive, systemic cover-up. One that went on for decades, absolutely destroyed thousands of families, and is really only now, finally, being brought into the light.
And to really get a handle on this, you have to start with the people. Just listen to this. I was told that I would be dead within 12 months. I was 23 years old. That's from a man named Derek Martindale who was infected back in 1985. I mean, those words just cut right to the heart of it, don't they? This whole tragedy is about thousands and thousands of real people whose lives were completely shattered by the very treatments that were supposed to be saving them.
So how on earth did this even happen? Well, to understand that, we've got to rewind a bit, back to the 1970s. You have to picture what life was like for someone with a bleeding disorder like hemophilia. It was incredibly restrictive. I mean, a simple fall could be life-threatening. Your whole life was basically a series of constant hospital visits.
And then this new treatment comes along. It's called factor concentrate. And honestly, it was a complete game changer. It was revolutionary. You could actually store it in your own fridge at home and give yourself the injection. For the very first time, this offered patients and their families the promise of, well, freedom, a normal life.
I mean, can you just imagine the sheer hope, the relief? Families put their absolute total trust in their doctors and in this new medicine. You hear it in the words of people like John Morrissey. He said his parents were told it was a wonder drug. And why would they think anything different? At the time, they had absolutely no reason to.
But here's the thing. Hidden deep inside this medical marvel was a deadly, deadly danger. The cure, as it turned out, was about to become a curse.
So what even are these factor concentrates? Well, basically, they're made by taking blood plasma, you know, the liquid part of your blood, and pooling it all together from thousands, and I mean thousands, of different donors. The whole point of this process is to concentrate the clotting factors that people with hemophilia are missing.
And this is where the sheer scale of the risk becomes absolutely terrifying. The inquiry found that by the mid-1980s, a single dose, just one dose, of these concentrates could contain plasma from up to 10,000 different donors. Just let that sink in for a second. 10,000 people. If just one of those donors was sick with a blood-borne virus, the entire batch was contaminated.
Okay, so where was all this contaminated plasma coming from? Well, to meet the demand, the UK was relying really heavily on cheaper commercial imports, mostly from the United States. And this plasma was being sourced from paid donors. We're talking high-risk groups like prison inmates, intravenous drug users, and the screening for viruses was just dangerously, shockingly insufficient.
And this is where the story takes a really dark turn. It goes from being a tragedy of medical risk to a story of outright betrayal. Because what the official inquiry found, in no uncertain terms, is that the authorities knew about these dangers long before they ever told the patients.
Just look at this timeline. As early as July 1982, the US CDC is reporting AIDS in people with hemophilia. By November, UK newspapers are reporting the risk. Then, in March 1983, US officials are sending these stark, private warnings to UK doctors. And yet, months later in July, the UK government makes the absolutely fateful decision not to stop importing these dangerous products. Even though safer alternatives were right there, they just weren't prioritized. Okay, this is just chilling. On one side, you have the public reassurances given to patients in May 1983, and on the other, what officials were being told in private just weeks before. They're out there telling patients the risk is small, while behind closed doors, they're hearing that the AIDS epidemic is evolving with a frightening pace. This wasn't a case of not knowing. This was a deliberate, calculated downplaying of a known, catastrophic risk. And the consequences of those decisions, well, they were, and they still are, just absolutely devastating. So let's turn to the real-world impact, the human cost, for the people who were infected.
I mean, the way people found out they had these life-changing diagnoses, it was often just shockingly cruel and callous. The inquiry heard so many stories of people being told in big group meetings, or getting a letter in the mail, or just finding out completely by accident. A lot of people weren't even told for years, which robbed them of the chance to get treatment or to stop it spreading to their partners.
I mean, just listen to this story from Michael Mason. He said, "I found out I was HIV positive when I received a diet sheet through the post about what to do if you had HIV or AIDS. Can you even imagine that? Getting your death sentence on a diet sheet in the mail?
And the thing is, the inquiry reports are just filled with these kinds of stories, painting this awful picture of a healthcare system that it completely and totally failed in its most basic duty of care.
And for so many of them, especially the kids who were infected, that diagnosis was the start of what one victim just called a psychological hell. They had to live with this constant shadow of death hanging over them, the stigma, the uncertainty. People were told they were dangerous, that they were a killing machine. So many of them just hid their illness from literally everyone they knew.
And you know, this tragedy, it didn't just stop with the person who was infected. No way. It ripped through entire families. Parents lost their children, children lost their parents. This trauma has just cascaded down through generations. This was a national tragedy, yes, but it played out in thousands and thousands of private, heartbreaking family tragedies.
So, as the victims and their families started to piece things together and ask questions, you'd think they'd get answers, right? Nope. What they got was a wall of institutional denial that would stand firm for decades.
And this, right here, this was the official mantra. This was the line to take, the phrase that government officials and health bodies just repeated over and over and over again for years. And the public inquiry found that this statement, it was just flat out wrong. It was a line they adopted without doing any real investigation, and they used it to deflect blame and shut down any calls for accountability.
What the inquiry really exposed was something that you can only call an institutional playbook for how to manage a scandal. Step 1, deny any and all blame. Insist nothing wrong was done. Step 2, offer these minimal so-called ex gratia payments, but make it crystal clear it is not a compensation scheme. Step 3, delay and resist. Argue that a public inquiry isn't needed, that there's nothing to be learned. And finally, step 4, just keep repeating the line. Parrot that official mantra to deflect any criticism and avoid being held accountable.
But after decades, literally decades, of relentless campaigning by victims and their families, a full public inquiry was finally granted. And its conclusions, which came out in 2024, were definitive, and they were absolutely damning.
Yeah, the inquiry's verdict left no room for doubt. This was not an accident. Patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks. Warnings were ignored. Safer alternatives were not used. It found that children, especially at a specialist school called Trellers, were essentially used as objects for research without consent. And the truth was hidden for decades and what the inquiry called a chilling and pervasive cover-up. That official line to take was not just wrong, it was unacceptable.
And the final toll, it is just staggering. We're talking more than 30,000 people, including people who just got transfusions during surgery or childbirth, who are infected with HIV, hepatitis C, or sometimes both. Over 3,000 people have died so far, and sadly, that number just keeps on rising.
And all of this, it brings us to the final unavoidable question, doesn't it? The facts are now out there, the cover-up has been exposed. But for the thousands of families who have lived through a lifetime of suffering, who have fought for decades against this wall of deceit, what does justice actually look like now? That's the question that now hangs over the entire nation.